Hello and welcome to the special event for the London Spanish Book and Zine Fair. I am Mark Silberstein and will be your interviewer. Tonight's schedule will start with me interviewing Isabel about her wonderful, gripping and experimental autobiography, A Woman Alone, Fragments of a Memoir. This will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session with you, the audience. I just want to start by very briefly introducing myself. If you have just joined us now, I'm Mark Silberstein, a freelance journalist who's worked on BBC World Service radio programs, amongst other news organizations. I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa, and I've been living in London for 21 years now, that long. And Isabel del Rio is a poet, writer, and linguist, and she writes in both her languages, English and Spanish. She has just published her autobiography, A Woman Alone, Fragments of a Memoir. The book is written in sections or fragments. Most of the book is in English, but there are sections in Spanish. And just briefly about the book tells the story of a child of a fascist regime who was brought up in London and how England became the country she called her own and how English turned out to be her language of choice. It includes a series of recollections, notes, and reflections. A disjointed childhood and adolescence, growing up without a sense of identity, exposure to the death and destruction of those closest, incidents of assault, abuse, and gaslighting, a lifelong commitment to both the written word and the spoken word, a compilation of dreams and disappointments, living in a society enforcing archaic and prejudiced beliefs, seeking refuge in the world of make-believe, surviving a repressive political system, and hovering above everything, the memories of a civil war that had torn a country apart, but more so its people. So with that remarkable and fascinating description, I just want to say hello, Isabel.
Hello, good evening, Mark, and hello, everyone. Hello, Sylvia, and hello to the book fair. Great to be here. Thank you so much to the London Spanish Book and Zine Fair for organizing such amazing events this year. Even though we are online, it's still incredible. Thank you.
Yes, and I'd just like to say, so glad to be here with you tonight to talk about your autobiography, A Woman Alone, Fragments of Memoir, published by the imprint that you are the co-founder of, Friends of Alice Publishing.
Thank you, Mark. I will be answering your questions, I trust. And I will also be reading some sections from the book that I think will be relevant for the interview.
That's great. So without further ado, we'll get started with the interview. So to start at the very beginning, a very good place to start, to ask you, how long did it take you to write the memoir and why publish it now, Isabel?
Right, well, there are two sections to this question. The first section is how long did it take me? It's taken me about 10 years, literally. It started with a very simple poem discussing various dramatic events that I had lived through, and the memoir built up from there. I recounted not only my experiences, but the historical context in which I grew up. But also I was asked by my younger daughter and my sister at one point that I had to write everything down before something happened. And I dedicated, in fact, the book is dedicated to them, to Susie and Julia. They already knew when and where, but they have now asked why and how. And the memoir is the why and the how of everything that happened. The memoir also includes several short sections from other books of mine, fiction and poetry. And of course, although it is a memoir, I had to fix it and place it in the present moment. And of course, I also mention the pandemic, which is something that has taken over our lives with these huge, far-reaching consequences and how it's changed us. Now, you also asked about why publish it now?
Yeah.
Well, I suffered a health scare last year, and I'm kind of recovered now. And I thought it was better to finish the book just in case. I was reminded by the whole experience as you know, as I'm mortal, basically, as if I needed reminding. And that allowed me to give a certain hue to the book, painting it in some instances a little bit darker than it should have been, and in other instances a little bit lighter, because I have to get on with my life. We all do. And finally, I just want to mention the fact that I've always had this excruciating sense of urgency that things must be done as soon as possible, just in case something happens. So in the last few months, if you like, or year, I sort of pushed it through. It was difficult to push it through, but I managed to push it through and finalize it and publish it.
That's great, thank you. I just wanted to add that it's certainly going to be a testament to this crazy time of this pandemic, and I believe that the Museum of London is actually documenting stuff now to talk about this period of time when the pandemic is happening. So perhaps that might be an avenue for you. Approach the Museum of London, and you know, you have your testament here for this dark
be in a
period.
museum. That would be good, to be in a museum.
Yeah. So
that's a good idea. Yeah.
We're living through a very interesting, horrible time, but certainly a historical time, if anything. And these testaments are what are going to be the memories for this time period, certainly.
Maybe we live in interesting times. This is an old
Chinese curse, I believe,
yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, we certainly are. Yes.
Definitely. Great. So yeah, moving on to the next question. Why did you write it in sections, or fragments as you call them?
Right. Well, I think that's how our mind works. When we recall things, memories appear in a short, sharp sort of shocks, like bits and oddments and bursts of information that suddenly come to us from the past, or sometimes from nowhere, or nowhere that we can recognize. And so I decided to tell it in fragments of reality, if I may say so, not figments of my imagination. This is an autobiography, a real autobiography, after all. I wanted the book to look like a series of diary entries, snippets of memory, sketches, anecdotes, facts, because I had to provide some kind of context, quotes from those I loved and I still love, and from famous people. It's like a series of, it's like an inventory of things that I did, or that I found, or that I lost. And I included, as I said before, little sections of my own published fiction and poetry, all in this and that order, a bit like a scrapbook. And there are one-liners, short sections like aphorisms. Other sections are one paragraph, and just a few sections are a bit longer than paragraphs. It's several pages. Ultimately, what I wanted was to tell a story rather than share a chronicle, or rather than put together a series of facts about my life and what I'd lived through. So for readability purposes, I dramatized the text, made it into a story, but naturally without changing the events themselves. And I told everything like a series of short stories, or even very short stories in some cases, little fragments. And the result is that we have a series of freestanding and self-contained segments, all of which have a sequential narrative, of course, and there's certainly a storyline in the book. Now, when we come to the subject of chronology, we could say that it is somewhat irregular. Things don't follow the usual chronological order. And at one point in the book, I even say stuff chronology. There we are.
Great, and nicely put. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and what I did love about it, as you refer to as fragments, is that you could come in at any time and then go back out, but there was an actual incredible structure to it, which I assume was very much a natural process of laying events, etc. It also did remind me of a scrap. When I was a kid, I had a scrapbook, and I used to put things into it, and looking back at those, I often wondered, at the time, what I thought was great, I may not, think, looking back, why did I do it? But then in the greater context of things, as we get older, we see how everything plays its place and its role. And And I like to think if I continued my scrapbook, that would change and those ideas would evolve into something else, which would be more meaningful today and possibly look back in 5 years and go, not then. But it's all part of the process of who we are and what we've become through this learning process. So, and I think your book exemplifies it exceptionally well, and it has so many different elements to it. You've lived a very interesting and a remarkable life, Isabel, and I think it's really captured very well.
Long, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So moving on to the next question. Why did you write the book in both languages?
Well, it's because I write in both languages. I write in English and I write in Spanish, normally separately. Some of the books I've written have been only in English, some only in Spanish, and I have also written a book which is a bilingual collection of stories, or I should say a collection of bilingual stories in Spanish and in English, which was Cero Negativo, Zero Negative, as well as a bilingual collection of poems that is shortly to be published in Spain by a Spanish publisher. Now, the memoir is written mostly in English, but I also wanted to include some of my thoughts and my own personal views on things and reminiscence in Spanish, as well as quotes by others in the original language, which in this case was Spanish. To give you but one example, I could not quote my grandfather in English. I had to reproduce everything that he said in Spanish, because these things that he said are inbuilt in me, they're in my marrow. And for example, I could not translate things like no me dan miedo los muertos sino los vivos, which is wonderful, which he would repeat ad nauseam. And I that's how it started. I thought I'll leave this in Spanish, and therefore I'll leave in Spanish things that other people who were important in my life, those things that they said. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I mean, this must be, a very, very hard task to write in 2 different languages, and I can only assume that, and as we've spoken about, there's this kind of conflict in a way, isn't there, with words that can be the case, and a very difficult process indeed, I'm sure, of training your brain to think in one way and writing in another and things like that.
The brain doesn't think along those lines, in the sense that what I'm doing now is difficult. The brain just gets on with it. But for someone else, it might be difficult. But it just comes naturally. I'm not saying writing is easy. It is extremely difficult. But moving from one language to the next, depending on the subject, is something that, as I said before, it comes naturally and it feels right. When you say something in English, it feels right. When you say something in Spanish, it feels right. And that feeling of having achieved something which is in the right context, in the right language, in the right nuance, in the right feeling, with the right emotions, then we're onto something. We're beginning to get onto something. Yeah. Certainly.
Oh, great, thank you. So moving on to the next question. You mentioned in your book about growing up under the Francoist regime. Were you shocked by what you saw in Spain when you returned after having come from the 1960s London?
Well, I was born, as I like to say, in the aftershocks of the Civil War, and in any case, such aftershocks lasted for a very long time, and they can still be felt, even sadly today. In the days of the Francoist regime, when I was a young child and I went to London and came back as an adolescent, every aspect of your life was scrutinized. And this is what I said in the book. I want to read a section from this page. Let me find it. Yeah. Let me just read the section, which is self-explanatory. As a child, I was taken from a fascist dictatorship to 60s London, and I could not believe such freedom was possible. Then, as an adolescent, I was taken away from London and returned to a fascist dictatorship, and I thought that I had been condemned to some kind of underworld. A few years later, after university, I got a full-time job in London and returned, but only after having witnessed what fascist dictatorships can do to people and countries, and more so to your young mind and to your blossoming dreams. Freedom is what we must live for. And if you have to move away, whether from countries, people, ideas, situations, time spans, then so be it. Thank you.
Well, some very powerful.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to add that the contrast between the two countries, the two cultures, and the two historical environments affected me tremendously. Even at that age, I realized that there were two very different worlds: the world of a dictatorship and the world of freedom and democracy, without verbalizing these as such. But you could sense that there was a huge difference from two extremes, really, from one to the other. It was 60s London when I arrived as a young child, just imagine. And when I returned to Spain, I had to adapt. I had to relearn the language. The culture seemed completely alien to me. And as to the customs, I could not understand. I could not understand neither the people nor events. I had to get used to all these things. Now, there's another section which I think gives a flavor of what I encountered when returning to Madrid after spending some years in London in the 1960s. In London, where nobody questioned what people did or behaved like or even wore. And let me find this. It's about wearing stuff. Yeah. Here I am, returning as an adolescent from freest London to oppressed Madrid, wearing biba, a very tight-ribbed white sweater, a shocking pink kilt, white leather boots with a knotted flap, and a white quilted mat with a matching fedora. Yes, here I am, all dressed up like a 60s child, but living in a fascist tyranny. People stopped to look at me in the street, perhaps in admiration, but more likely in shock. Until I arrived in the city, I did not know that there were rules for what you wore, and particularly for what you thought or did. It was a tough time in the country for everyone, but more so for the young. Yet by wearing harmless but dissenting clothes, seeds were sown and cracks appeared. Concede we did not.
Remarkable. It's such a testament to a remarkable and horrific time in history. So going to a country that you were born in became an actual culture shock to you.
Yes, because they're very formative years. I left when a child is creating his or their picture of the world, their understanding, they're beginning to understand the world, and I was taken away. And then I returned as an adolescent, a teenager, beginning my teenagehood, where it's another very critical time in life when you're not coming to terms, because adolescents don't come to terms that easily, but beginning to understand a little bit more. So it was a culture shock, and a shock from many points of view. I can assure you, it's all in the memoir. Yeah.
No, I can only imagine, and it's very very graphic described, and remarkable at how it was affected so many aspects of people's lives, down to the clothing that they wore. I mean, all of this was so important to them, you know, that even how you looked and dressed represented this type of very conservative mentality that obviously governed for a very long time as the regime lasted for. So definitely. Okay, so moving on to the next question. There are mentions of misogyny in your book. How do you feel this has changed, if at all, in today's world, especially with movements like the #MeToo movement?
Well, it is what women have suffered throughout history. We may now have more tools, more rights, more means to accomplish what we want to accomplish. All of it, of course, we managed to achieve at very great cost, I have to say, but we're not going to go into that. We don't have much time. But however, we must remember that we're talking about the West. In other countries and cultures, women are severely ill-treated, wronged, unable to develop academically or professionally. So, you know, there are two sides to the story, and on a personal note, as I mentioned in the book, I mentioned several brief cases. I have been at the receiving end of serious encounters, some of them serious encounters in which I was taken advantage of, I was bullied, I was gaslit, mistreated, abused. I do not give names in the memoir. I decided I didn't want any court cases. I only give initials, and I even give the wrong initials. So that. But here's one example of the several incidents that I recall in the book. It's a brief one, but it's quite shocking. Here it is. I attended a sci-fi film festival. This was in Madrid, and I was put in charge of PR, welcoming and accompanying famous individuals from the international world of film. In one of the evening events, the celebrated film director, R, we shall call him R, suggested that I go up to his room. I replied that I was married, and he said that he did not mind. There we are. The thing is that I believe that it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, of course, but it's not about things happening to me or to you, to the audience. It's about what happens. Let me rephrase that. What happens to one woman happens to all of us. I believe that as long as there are women suffering and being mistreated, then our fight is not over. It literally goes on. And on this subject, I want to say something about how important it is for women to write their story, the history of women. And let me find this. This is another thing I wanted to read. And here it is. Women's history is mostly an oral history, and our knowledge was passed from generation to generation by word of mouth through traditions and rituals, from dialogues that held many of the secrets of civilization and progress over centuries to the teachings of universal folklore and mythologies. It is a history that still needs to be fully and painstakingly documented. Until then, we must write it down individually, one by one. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very powerful stuff. Very, very powerful. And yeah, certainly, once again, the word testament comes up again. It's a testament and responsibility to catalog and to make sure that these things are never forgotten, so that we can fight against injustices like this, which is being done much more in today's world, thankfully, especially with regards to misogyny. And moving on to the next question, the subject of identity seems to be a recurring element in your book. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, may I point out that it comes up in the book, but identity is not such a big issue for me. I'll tell you why. It's because I don't particularly identify with this or that. In terms of identity, I pick and choose. I like to observe, and I don't necessarily identify with things. I certainly don't identify with a nation or a particular culture or specific traits. I think that perhaps the closest thing I have to identity is language itself. It's been a major component in my life, and that's what I identify with language. And I'm talking about language with a capital L, not languages, because in my view, as a linguist and as a writer, language is one, albeit full of various groupings and uses, permutations, interpretations, translations, practices. I want to say something from the book about knowing other languages and how your behavior changes, how it's affected in the process of speaking other languages. Here it is. It's very short. This is a very short one. There really is nothing to knowing other languages. You just need to have a wider vocabulary and a marginally more complex set of emotions. That's how much language changes us. Now, I learned 2 languages. It was a long process, using various techniques which I wasn't aware of, but apparently there are techniques and ways of learning a language. And of course, both languages affected the way I perceive the world, and the way language gave me an identity of sorts, of course. Let me read something else about language, and here it is. How I got my languages. As a young child, I learned English both intuitively and academically at the same time. Regarding Spanish, I learned it intuitively from birth. I did not speak it much for several years, by which time it had become a passive language. And then I had to relearn it as a teenager, but this time academically. Mine was what they call sequential bilingualism. However, all such technicalities are without relevance. The important question to ask is whether you are the same person when you speak a particular language as when you speak another. Or even better, are you 2 people at the same time? Part of me would be inclined to say, no way. And part of me would definitely proclaim in a very loud and penetrating voice, sí, sí, sí. There we are.
Thank you very much. And moving on to the next question. In reading your autobiography, it would seem that you have lived hundreds of lives in this one. What is the next step in the reincarnation of Isabel?
My goodness, yes, it does feel like I've lived hundreds of lives. I really have, especially now that I've put everything in a book. Well, not everything, because I left out lots of things you can imagine. Years I left out, but there we are. This is, it's hundreds of lives. This is probably why I feel so tired. But let me again read a section about, like a recap about what I have done with my love. It's at the end of the book, a bit like the ending in a way. There may be more things to come, hopefully, and there will be more things to come after this. But this is, for me, this is a nice little recap with which to end the book, although we're not ending the interview just yet. So here goes. Did I achieve what I wanted to achieve? Well, for one thing, the end is mercifully not yet here. So there is time for what I still need to do, and hopefully plenty of time. Yes, the outcome of all this may not be what I anticipated, nor have I become the person I set out to be, but I did manage a few encouraging results. Undeniably so. I'm not sure whether it was because I was running out of steam and had to inevitably settle for what I already had, or whether it was because I rightly managed to fight it out. In the process, I must admit that a few exciting territories have been discovered, some interesting questions posed, several useless cups broken. Yes.
Great, thank you. I especially...
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say that this paragraph feels like I've reached the end of the road, but I haven't. I haven't read. Yeah, I'd like to read another paragraph, but I think we might not have time. What do you think? I think it's a bit tight.
Yeah, we should probably move on to...
Yes.
We can move to
your next question, yes.
Because we do have a little bit more time before the Q&A, as we were told, so we can move on to the next one, definitely.
Unless you want me to read this, but no, let's move. Yeah, it's not a major section. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we should just make sure that we have time for the audience. These questions are already piling up, so happy to say a few there. So yeah, we'll move on to just to say what projects are you working on next?
Well, I'm about to publish in Spain with a Spanish publisher. I think I mentioned this before. A bilingual book of poetry in Spanish, but it then changes to English, then it changes to Spanish, and so on. So it's a little wordplay. It's a little experiment with language or languages. Next year, I will be publishing a poetry anthology with another publishing house, Ojo de la Cultura, and it will be an anthology of Latin American poets living in the UK, and I will be translating the poems in Spanish into English. Another thing is that I will be publishing my own anthology of short stories, with a Spanish-speaking publisher. And then I have all these stories waiting for me in a series of folders. They're just waiting for me to get started. Some of them have already been started. Some of them are outlined. Some of them are almost finished. So many stories to tell I have, and like gestating babies waiting to be given the birth, the breath of life. It sounds very dramatic, but that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
And I will be working very hard on my PhD. It's continuing, and which is on the subject of creative writing, as to be expected. So it is never ending, and thank goodness for that, because if I stick, I suppose if I stick to doing never ending things, then I might be here for a long time. Who knows?
Well, and have an incredibly strong legacy behind you, and maybe even in the Museum of London, who knows? So.
Yes, you are talking about the Museum of London. I will have to write to them. Yeah. Not sure if it's a strong legacy. It's some kind of legacy. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Great. So moving on to the next question, where can people find your work?
Well, if our audience, kind audience, is interested, they can check my website, which is isabeldelrio.com, or better still, www.isabeldelrio.co.uk. There's a problem sometimes with the .com. I don't know why. I have to sort it out. There's information about what I do, and there are some short stories and some poems, both in English and Spanish, that can be read. You can download them. You can find me on social media, the usual Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and of course on Amazon, which sells most of my books, I suppose, in a way. Yeah. Great,
thank you. And I think we've got a reading that you're going to want to do. So so to ask you if you'd like to read in Spanish from the memoir, as this is the London Spanish Book and Zine Fair, and you write in both, so remarkably so. So yeah, it's up to you. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I'm going to read this. It's as I said before, the book, my memoir, Fragments of a Memoir, A Woman Alone, included fragments from some of the stories that I've published earlier in other books. And one of the fragments that I included is from a story called El Laberinto, published in my book of short stories, Una Muerte Incidental. I'd like to read the whole story, because only a part of it is included in the memoir, if I may. It's one of my favorite stories. I shouldn't say this, but I do. I'm sorry, I'm saying it. It's a very short tale. It's more a tale than a story. And it's about suddenly waking up in a labyrinth of all places. And the protagonist does not know where they are, how long they will be there, whether, this is the most important thing, whether they will be able to find the exit one day. They know nothing. Now, this is the story. It's not very long, and it will lead us to the questions. So, para desplazarse por un laberinto sin mancharse las manos, uno ha de aplicarse con gravedad y adoptar decisiones inalterables. En las encrucijadas se avanzará en una dirección durante un tiempo y luego en dirección contraria, para así introducir un elemento de orden en la aventura, en lugar de dejarlo todo en manos del azar. Es decir, para adelante y para atrás, como si no hubiera otra cosa que hacer, sin aspirar a nada o queriéndolo todo, convencidos del éxito final o habiendo tirado ya la toalla. En otras palabras, seremos plenamente conscientes de que no hay más opción que esa, recorrer el laberinto y confiar en que algún día se encontrará la salida. Hay que seguir y seguir, no hay otra, ¿para qué engañarse? Y trataremos de sacar fuerzas de donde sea y de emprender iniciativas por temerosos que seamos. Así de fácil, no hay vuelta atrás. Pero no perdamos el sentido de la realidad, de la mesura. Tras varios intentos, y si uno no se siente ya con ganas de continuar, se acampará en el claro más propicio de haberlo, en espera de que cambie la fortuna, o al menos hasta que recuperemos las fuerzas. Si el viaje dura ya varios años, está permitido dejar constancia de que uno ha pasado por allí, inscripciones en la arena, siluetas recortadas en los matorrales que separan una galería de otra, alguna prenda personal abandonada casualmente en el trecho de nuestro antojo. En el supuesto de que uno encuentre la salida por sí mismo, cosa inaudita, pero posibilidad, al fin y al cabo, es aconsejable volver a recorrer el laberinto para demostrar que el éxito no fue fruto de la casualidad, sino de un plan metódico y sopesado. Y así se hallará la salida una vez, 2 veces o las que haga falta, a fin de manifestar nuestra dedicación y competencia. Aun cuando se conozca el laberinto como la palma de la mano, es preferible esta opción a la huida, ignorándose como se ignora lo que nos espera al otro lado, pues nadie que se sepa ha logrado escapar del laberinto hasta ahora. Mejor lo malo conocido, aunque la tentación de evadirse sea del todo irresistible. Sí, mejor claudicar y no arriesgarse a fracasar en el intento. ¿Para qué huir, dicen algunos, si no hay más que lo que hay? ¿Para qué imaginar lo que no existe o soñar con lo que no puede conseguirse? ¿Para qué esforzarse cuando todo esfuerzo es inútil, toda visión falsa, toda explicación disparatada, toda resistencia inútil? Y por eso, he aquí una última advertencia. En el caso de que no hayamos encontrado la salida, que no la encontraremos, claro, y ya no nos alcance la vida, digamos, que no nos alcanzará, según está previsto, se aconseja postrarse en un rincón y hacer un recuento de los senderos recorridos, aun cuando no hayan conducido a nada. Para consolarse, uno podría inventar relatos sobre situaciones parecidas de las que no haya escapatoria y luego memorizar esos relatos por si un día, imprevisible, pero también improbablemente, alguien llegara dispuesto a escucharnos. Hay quien asegura que en el instante mismo que precede a la muerte puede verse el laberinto con vista de pájaro y por tanto se descubre de manera concluyente dónde está la salida. Se trata de una revelación improductiva para manifestar que la huida es a la vez posible e imposible. Aunque no se tengan noticias de que haya otros laberintos en las proximidades, con otros habitantes y otros trayectos, está permitido pedir socorro a voces por si alguien pudiera escucharnos. Pese a todo, se sospecha que uno existe en solitario, de manera que gritar en el laberinto se asemejaría a gritar en el vacío, donde nada se escucha o reproduce. Y sin embargo, un grito en el vacío es tanto más deseable que el vacío por sí solo. Si queda la estela del grito, entonces queda algo. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, that moves us on nicely to the Q&A, and we have a few questions here. So one of the questions from our audience is asks, based on what you said about transcribing other people's thoughts or facts, you use your mother's war diary written in Spanish. Is this a real diary, or is it your imagination and creativity talking through an imagined mother?
No, it's here. I have it here. Here it is. It's precious. It is, nothing is imagined. Everything is real, especially anything to do with my mother, but everything is real. It is my mother's diary, and I have a picture of it. And here it is. Here is the diary. It's all these pages, and it has to be taken to a museum. Absolutely, I have to do this. Is something. It was written by her. She was a teenager, and she was in Barcelona. And it's not my imagination. This is real, and I wish I could write like her. She was a brilliant writer. So I keep it here, and I have to take it to a museum, definitely. So, yeah.
And with regards to the diary itself,
let me put it back where I don't want it lost. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. Okay.
Thank goodness I had it there, but I didn't realize I was going to be asked. Yeah. Thank you.
With regards to the diary itself, when did your mother start writing it? As the war started, or prior, or?
She always wrote. My mother always wrote. My mother and my father. They were writers. They were writers. They didn't become famous, but there are so many people who are writers. My mother always wrote poetry. endless poems. She wrote this when she was a very young girl, and beautifully written. And there is a picture of it in the book. I took a picture of the first page of her diary. Yes, so it's true. Yes,
that's great. Okay. Somebody asked, could you please read what you're going to read a moment ago? And I think actually it's a good time to do that as well. Was the question that we unfortunately skipped for, but we do have a little bit of time. So
yes,
if you remember what question it was.
Yes, it was it was a funny little paragraph. I've got it here. It's a little humorous, but for me it's perfectly serious. It's the journey of looking and searching and looking and searching and looking and searching, and it never really ends. You just go on looking, thinking that you're going to find something, you don't find it, and you go on. Anyway, let me stop and I'll quote this. I've got this here, and it goes like this. One of my earlier beliefs was that after a certain age, I would have a good idea of what everything was about. Having reached that age, things seem to me to be even more bewildering. Someone's coming into my room. Charles, I'm on a Zoom thing. You've seen the sign. Sorry about that. I will start again. I was interrupted. One of my earlier beliefs was that after a certain age, I would have a good idea of what everything was about. Having reached that age, things seem to me to be even more bewildering. Perhaps I have not waited long enough, and I would need to wait a little bit more. And then after a certain age, I will have some kind of idea of what everything is about. But when reaching that age, things might seem even more perplexing, and so I will have to wait some more. And after a certain age, I will have a relatively good idea about what things are about. But when reaching that age, things might seem to be totally incomprehensible. Who knows? And so I will have to wait just a little more, and then perhaps after a certain age, ... There we are. Sorry about the interruption. People were told, but I apologize.
Life
There's a
gets
sign on my door, but people did not read the sign. Sorry about that.
Life gets in the way. It's nice to have a kind of glimpse into
life,
your
yes.
world there, you know, and
this
your
is
life.
real life. Yeah.
It's
this
real
is
life.
poetry and fiction, and then we have real life disrupting everything.
as it happens.
It happens, yes.
Live time, yeah, absolutely. So we have a question just on faith, actually, and any particular faith or anything at all that you ever had growing up or with influences around you.
I was raised by nuns, and I was raised as a Catholic, but I'm a non-believer, and I do state that throughout the book that I'm a non-believer. I have utmost respect for people of all religions, of course, as long as they respect me and I respect them. That's how it is. But I'm a non-believer. I believe in this. I believe in fiction and poetry and the word, written word, the spoken word. Yeah. I don't.
I think there's a lot of faith out there, and there's a lot of people believing in different things, and I certainly concur with that you know, everybody has to respect everybody else's views in life, because we all live on this planet together, and there's a heck of a lot of us here, so it's about time we all learn to accept everyone's views and just go, you know what, or perhaps turn the other cheek. I don't know. Quoting from somebody that's from somewhere, I forget now. That was a joke. But yeah, I think we have a bit more time. Let me just check. As everybody knows, with regards to questions, we had a few, but you can just type them in and I'll read them. So if anyone else is interested in putting more questions in the meantime, I think what we'll do is we can go on to a few more questions, Isabel, if you're right with that.
Fine, or I can read some more from the book. It's up to you, whatever you wish.
Let's have a look and see. Yeah, I think I wanted to actually ask on nostalgia. it's something that one picks up quite a bit in the book. Is it a longing to change the past, or is it looking back so as never to forget by recording it in words as a testament to the past, or even both for that matter?
You're talking about nostalgia.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how can you not miss things that passed and are never to return? And you have them in your mind, and eventually they disappear as well from your mind. So, yeah, the book in a way is a testament to what I lived through, and to all the women in my life who were so important, and who did not have a career, or were not able to fulfill their dreams. Many of them were artists or writers, and the men as well. My father also was an artist and a writer, and he wasn't able to fulfill his dreams. The more nostalgic elements in the book are perhaps nothing to do with words. I've included some photographs in the middle, and the majority have been taken by me, but some are historical photographs. Even an image of the diary, my mother's war diary, which I will publish one of these days soon, hopefully. And so the pictures are very nostalgic, I would have thought. There are also 8mm films that my father would take, and this links with the element of how I was raised, how we were raised in those years as females, as women, as girls. We were raised in a way that stopped us. Although my parents were very encouraging, I have to say, but in general, the education stopped us from fulfilling our dreams and having careers. It's all changed now, thank goodness. But there's a section, I've got it here, let me just check, that about the 8mm films, which I have lots of them from my father. And it says, all those 8mm films from childhood show me primed and molded into this charming, obedient, wholesome, impeccable little girl who had no say whatsoever in her life. Yes, even then they were intent on making me into the perfectly subdued woman. So, you know, that's nostalgia. But I think nostalgia, there's a sort of negative aspect of nostalgia, because not about longing for the past, but longing for the previous regime. As difficult to hear as that might be, but it is happening. There are a number of nostalgic people who want to relive certain elements of the previous regime, hence the return of the far right in Spain, which is happening as we speak.
Yeah.
And I have another section here.
We've got 3 more questions actually that have come in. So yeah,
I'll just, we have 7 minutes, so shall I just read this very quickly?
Of course.
There is an element of wanting to go back to the past, a deep nostalgia about what was once good and great in some people's twisted minds. All of this results in a constant confrontation between the old and the new, or to put it more accurately, between the retrograde and the enlightened. Yes, a few still today aspire to preserve ancient customs that serve solely to prolong the concept of privilege, and to sustain a way of life that demands that you never depart from the old norms, however regressive or unfounded or unjust they may be. The tragic events will soon be a century old, and I take comfort from the old proverb, no hay mal que 100 años dure. Sorry, so you want to go back to the questions?
Oh yeah, no, great, thank you for that. That was lovely. Yeah, so we've got about 4 more that have come in, so we'll see if we can address them with the time that we have. So one of them is, do you have any advice for someone on how to get started on their own memoir, and in particular as a woman?
How to get started? You know, one way is to look at old photographs. You look at old photographs and they sort of revive or lots of memories. They bring them up to the surface, and you can start describing that. you could start describing what you see in the photograph, and that takes you to another memory and another memory. That's one way of getting started. Yeah. Any more questions? We have
yeah,
quite a few.
another one, which is, do you make times to write, or do you write when you get inspirational moments? Which I think is a great question to know.
No inspiration, perspiration, no inspiration. That's all.
Perspiration.
I don't. If I wait for inspiration, it may not happen. But if you sit, does a journalist wait for inspiration? Does a lawyer wait for inspiration? Does a doctor wait for inspiration? No, it's a profession. This is a profession like any other. You sit and you write. Of course, certain things, certain phrases, certain visions that you may have may inspire you, but sometimes you just inspire yourself, I think. Yeah. Sorry, anything else?
Yeah, no, we've got another question asking about your mum and dad, if they were not able to fulfill their dreams in life.
That's so sad. I think I'm going to cry, but I won't. No, they weren't able to because of the time. The time women were totally repressed. It's in the memoir. My mother could not continue in her job when she got married. She was told to leave. Literally, it was unheard of that she could continue. She had a very good job. And my father, it's again in the memoir. He was an artist, and it's a long story, so it's in the memoir. But he wasn't able to do it because he was misunderstood. That's generally the word that applies to all artists. Misunderstood. Yeah. Great.
Well, okay, we've got the last question. We should be able to fit this in. Actually, we've done quite well. The time we got. And somebody says, from the audience, I've just, where's it gone now?
This person from Canada, living in Canada, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I've just reached my 10-year anniversary of living in Canada after moving here at 8 years old. And for the life of me, I cannot speak English without my Spanish accent being noticed. I can't believe how seamlessly you switch between the two accents. How in the world did you learn to speak with both accents flawlessly? Sorry if this is unrelated to your book, but
thank you
great question,
Marcos, for saying flawlessly. I don't think anything is flawless, but in my life, but I've no idea. To speak a language, it's you have to hear it. You pay a lot of attention to how it's spoken and be able to imitate it. If you can imitate what you hear, then listen and so on. Also, you have to be a little bit musical, perhaps sometimes, not always. If you're good at music, you can pick up all the various tonalities and all the various timbre and all the various modulations of a language. But I have no idea. I can give you a long list of things that I'm completely flawful.
Perhaps another book.
Perhaps another book.
Certainly. Yeah, and then we have one more here, which is, sorry, 1 second. I guess that growing up between two cultures and languages has enriched your life. Looking back now, would you have changed anything about your life? Another good one, and also between the two cultures, of course, as well.
It's pointless. I'm completely rational and I'm completely realistic. No, it's pointless to think I could have changed something. And everything that happened, even the tragic events that happened, like losing my mother when I was young and all these things, they have made me into what I am today. I'm not saying that, thank goodness, the tragedies happened. No, not at all. But I am who I am, a combination of all the good and the bad, and what is good and what is bad. Some terrible thing leads to a wonderful situation. Some wonderful things suddenly disappear, and you feel so unhappy. So I think we have to take it in our stride, just live life as it comes and try and be happy, because it is our right to be happy, and fight for your right to be happy, and for everyone's right to be happy. Everyone is entitled.
Thank you. I think it's
not stopping us from being happy, but that's their problem, yeah, and our problem as well. We have to stop them. Anyway, that's it. I think
it's a lovely way to.
Yeah,
it's a lovely way to end.
So sad. Now that I was getting warmed up.
I know it's always like that, isn't it? But thank you. It's been lovely speaking to you, Isabel, and thank you so much to the organisers and for this wonderful event. And thank you for everybody for attending the London Spanish Book and Zine Fair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It's been lovely.